Okay, welcome everybody. Is everybody in, Amara?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, some of us landed up in a Teams meeting, and then I was hurriedly sending this link to everybody, but you're actually in the waiting room, so I do apologize for the delay. So it's my great pleasure to welcome everybody here, and particularly our speakers today, Professor Mike Elliott. Thank you, Mike. Mike's a good, true colleague and friend, and Professor Alan Whitfield. And Mike is from University of Hull, but we all know him as the editor of Estuarine Coastal Shelf Science for many years that we've interacted with him. And then Alan is now Emeritus Chief Scientist at SAIAB, the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity, and an honorary associate professor at Rhodes University. And so today we're going to talk about publishing. Please do put your hands up if you have any questions. Mike and Alan are happy to take those as we go along. So over to you, Mike. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Janine. If I will share screen, as long as we can get into this. Okay, so has that come up okay?
Yes.
Yep, that's great. Okay, I'll firstly introduce myself, and then I'll let Alan introduce himself as well. Greetings to see, and it's great to see so many people online. I was going to say I had a quick look down the list of names there, and saw that I think there's one or two names I'm starting to recognise now, but I've had links for many years with NMMU, and before that Port Elizabeth, and especially SAIAB with Alan, as well as other universities in South Africa. As Janine mentioned, I'm now an emeritus professor at the University of Hull in the UK, which is in the northeast of the UK. Of England rather, and also I'm director of a research company called International Estuarine and Coastal Specialists. But again, as Janine mentioned, I'm one of the editors-in-chief of Estuarine Coastal Shelf Science. So we're going to go through a bit about writing papers, but also refereeing them. I've noticed before, I've been told before, that there's occasionally a delay on the line when I'm giving a presentation. If there is, then just bear with it. Sometimes I've noticed it occurs that if I've got our three grandsons staying here and everybody's on their tablets and laptops and phones all at the same time, then it gives a delay, but we'll see. So, okay, I'll let Alan introduce himself, and many of you are going to be familiar with Alan's work.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm a retired scientist from SAIAB, as Janine indicated. I also serve on both national and international scientific journals. So I've got a little bit of a perspective of the local scene as well as the international one. So hopefully I can help Mike with any national issues that may come up, or any issues that he doesn't cover from a South African perspective. But I think the international perspective is probably the most important thing, because most of you are going to be submitting your manuscripts to international journals, but there may also be cases where your manuscripts are more suitable for a national journal. But we will probably discuss those issues as Mike goes on. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Alan. Now, say, as Janine mentioned, if you've got a question, Alan and I work on the basis that if a question goes through your minds, it will have gone through other people's minds as well. So just ask it. Instead of leaving it till the end, then just ask it. If you're raising something that I know we're going to cover later on, we'll just mention that. But just do it now. Hopefully I'll be able to see your hands, but Janine, if someone raises their hands and it looks like we haven't seen it, then just shout out. We can do it.
Will do. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, so as we said, what I want to try and do is take you through a whole load of aspects of publishing and not only writing papers, but also refereeing them as well. And this is the list of things that we're going to try and cover. Now, I don't know how long Janine has got planned. I think we said probably takes about 2 hours to go through this. But again, that depends on the discussion anyway. And if it gets to the stage where we say, let's take a 5-minute break, then we'll just yell out. If my tea supply gets depleted, then we might take a break. But anyway, so we're going to go through all of these aspects. Now, let's work on the basis that many of you, you're either practicing scientists now or your students. If we're doing this in person, I'd ask, what your backgrounds are, whether you've written papers up to now, whether you've submitted them and had them accepted or rejected, or whether you're still publishing. But as saying, those that haven't had a go at writing papers yet, I'm sure you will do in the near future, especially being pushed by people like Janine and her colleagues and Alan and his colleagues to do so. Remember, the publishing is your it's your reputation, and indeed it's your legacy as well. That there. So I'm sure you're probably well aware of all this, that why we publish. Well, the aim of it is not just to do the work, but actually to get the work out there, and hopefully people use the work. We want to make sure our information is read, our information is used, and many of you will remember this science cycle of, you come up with an idea and a hypothesis, you test it, you revise it, you refine it, you test the next hypothesis, and so on. So we want to get our information out there, but as you'll see, there are different sorts of papers. Normal papers, review articles, short notes, and so on. And there's one of the dots there, the fifth one down, to get promoted or PhD. This might be the state you're in at the moment, or even your master's. I mean, if you can get a paper out of your master's thesis, that is great. That is really something there. And then, as we say, the last point there about ego. Your work is your epitaph. I would prefer that to be the word legacy, but Martin Welch did say there. And then a very good benthic biologist that I worked with and published a book with, John Gray, the late John Gray was in Norway. Papers being published more for the benefit of the authors and the benefit of the reader, which is a slightly cynical way of looking at this. But given that there's an awful lot of papers that are published that don't get read by anyone other than the author and the referees, then we want to make sure the papers get out there. So why do we publish? Fairly easily. And as you see there, the academic cycle is getting papers, having them submitted, getting them peer reviewed, revising them, editing them, getting them produced, getting them published, and so on. And you can see there which ones are your roles immediately. So anything that's an A there is you as the author. So we want you to get the papers submitted, to help review them, to check them, and so on. So you're part of this. And both Alan and I can't remember if we mentioned Alan, and that Alan is also an associate editor of Estuarine and Coastal Shelf Science, and that both Alan and I review for many journals as well. And not only is a role of the scientist to produce the papers, but also to review them as well. But we'll come on to reviewing later. We'll talk about this figure up there, about 30 to 60% rejected by editors, but we'll come on to rejections. But But just remember, everybody gets papers rejected. Janine, Alan, and I, we've all had papers rejected. We've all had them criticized by referees. We don't like it, but it happens there. So let's firstly talk about something that you'll always be told about, and this is particularly important for the funding aspects. And Alan may want to comment on this about the funding. We've got two publishing models. We've got a normal traditional publishing, that is, your institution subscribes to a journal. You can publish in that journal and you don't have to pay any money for it, but that your paper, in essence, then is owned by the journal, and your paper is only available then to people who subscribe to that journal. The other model, which is increasingly important these days, is what is called open access. And in open access, the journal isn't obtained by subscription, but the papers are, every author pays a fee, an author publication fee or an author publication costs. The author pays the fee. The article is made freely available online, and therefore it can go out to anybody who wants it. Now, more and more, we're being encouraged to get all our papers in open access. That's good. The problem is that it means the author is paying rather than a subscription is paying there. And with open access, there are various types of open access. One is what is called gold open access. That means you as the author, you pay the journal to get your paper published, and then it's free open access. You can do anything with it, with the paper that you want. It is an open access journal. You have paid to get your paper in it. The second type of open access is what we call green open access, and that is where your final published article is not open to anyone, but you can upload a version of your article into any repository you want. But that version is it's the final version before the journal puts its style on it. So really, it's the final PDF of the Word version. And you can make that version open as much as you want there. That's okay, Alan.
Yeah, Mike, in South Africa, some of the journals have what we call page charges, which has got actually nothing to do with open access. But in order to get your article published, once it's been accepted, you're required to actually submit page charges to cover the costs of the publication. What we find particularly in South Africa in terms of open access is the fees that are charged by international journals for open access are often prohibitively high. And therefore we find it very difficult to actually go that route, even though we would like to. So I think most South African scientists, when they publish internationally, go the route of basically accepting that it's not going to be full open access, which is it's not the same, I think, for international scientists where they have better access to funding for going the open access route. Generally, we don't. When we do a project, the open access funding is not available.
Yep. That's a good point. And in fact, Alan, it's the same for all of us. I mean, I was involved in one project which published over 200 papers, and the most we could afford to pay gold and open access, given that gold open access fees may be anywhere between $1,500 and $3,000 or so. We don't have the money to do that. So there is this paradox at the moment where we're being encouraged to produce papers open access, but we're not being given the money to do it. So the alternative, as it says here, is to do it by green open access. That is to make widely available the final PDF of your manuscript, rather than making open the final PDF from the journal itself. So Alan's quite right. It's a difficult that everybody faces at the moment there. So here's the summary of all that. On it, we've also put this thing called diamond open access, but that is where the journal has decided that you're so important, or your paper is so important, that they're going to waive the open access fee. So now in some cases, for things like journals like PLOS One, they may waive the open access fee if you plead poverty, or tell them you're a student and you don't have the money to do this. They might just waive the money for it, sort of thing. But as you say, normally there are costs. The page charges that Alan mentioned, yeah, some of these are left over from when the journals were being printed as paper copies, and the journal would ask money if you've got color diagrams, or if you've got something special in your paper. But as you see here, most of them, I mean, both Alan and I and Janine we will probably have a mixture of a few open access publications, but most of our publications would be in subscription journals, where we then we then just make them available as the normal paper. But these days, I mean, you can get hold of any paper. If someone writes to any of us asking for a paper, then we usually send it. The main thing is that if your paper is published in a journal and it's not open access, you shouldn't put that published paper version, you shouldn't upload it onto a public site. So for example, you can't put it onto ResearchGate, or you can't put it on your university repository, because you don't own the copyright. It's a crazy system where we do all the work by writing the papers and reviewing them, but in the end, unless we pay open access, we sign away copyright for this. The next big topic is ethics and plagiarism, ethical issues, and it's very easy to fall foul of all of these things. The ethic issues in publishing, and as you see there are three of these. All of them are certainly no-nos, and some are more serious than others. And there are good examples of these, I hate to say. Fabrication, making up research data. There are some really nice examples of this. For example, those of you who've studied genetics at all will remember Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics. His data, the data he gave for his first genetic tests, are too perfect. You cannot reproduce them exactly as he got them. If you remember, it was all about crossing beans, I think, or whatever it was. But so he did make up some of his data, or he did the next one, the falsification. He manipulated his data. That is, he removed some data that was inconvenient, let's call it. It didn't fit his theory. So his data are too perfect that you wouldn't get them if you did the experiment, not the way he did it. So just be careful of those. But I'm sure none of you would do any of that. The biggest topic, however, is plagiarism. The idea of you passing work off that somebody else has done on your own. You'll see here about these are the ethics issues that we've got, you know, and we'll talk about some of these sorts of things. But you'll see there, you know, plagiarism is the biggest block on that pie chart. And remember, this would result badly on all of us. It would reflect badly on all of us if we're doing any of these. And once some people start cheating at science, then it devalues all of us and that. Nowadays, when you when you submit a paper, or even when you submit your theses, you can put them through plagiarism detection software, and any paper you submit to a journal would also be put through this plagiarism detection software. You know, it scans all the articles and sees whether or not you are copying any there. Plagiarism software is getting better now. It will now not only detect if you've copied, say, a paragraph from somewhere else or a figure, but it will also detect if you've copied a paragraph, changed some of the wording in it, it will still tell you that that paragraph was from something else. And Alan might remember we've had some cases at the moment in estuarine and coastal shelf science, and indeed in all journals of plagiarism. So there are now these publication ethics that we have to follow. So have a look through those and that. One of the an area is a bit of a minefield, really, and this is plagiarizing your own work. That is, you've published something in one outlet, and then you're using the same in another one. Strictly speaking, you have got it's your intellectual property, but because it's been published in a paper, then someone else might own the copyright to that paper, and what you're doing is you're copying it from one to another. The underlying lesson here is just keep referencing whenever you can. Reference your sources, and we work on the basis that if you haven't referenced something in your paper, you are saying these are my own ideas, my own words. And that's why, you know, the papers that say the three of us produce, we'll have to reference our own work because no, that's where our ideas are coming from there. And say this bit below, the example of plagiarism is really no, this is the main point. It's saying is something in another work and you're just copying it. So don't do it. Just cite them properly. If we find that papers have been plagiarized at all, there are various things. Well, one is it might not get published at all. Sometimes we find that the papers have been plagiarized. We had one example, Alan might remember it. We had one in estuarine and coastal shelf science where somebody, and I'll mention the country because it does come up. Someone in China had taken a copy of a paper we published in estuarine and coastal shelf science, which was about Mexico. It was all about GIS and habitats in Mexico. They'd taken that paper, they'd used a lot of paragraphs, they'd used the figures from it, although they had made the black and white figures into color. And then they'd changed the name and they'd published it as GIS about habitats in China. Terrible, this. It's awful. These are various things that we can do nowadays because of electronic publication. We can get that paper withdrawn. We can get it there. When it was print copies, unfortunately, the print copy would stay out there. So it can lead to sort of sanctions against you there. That case I mentioned about, the one in China, we tried to contact the author's university. We tried to contact the rector or vice chancellor of the university to let them know what's happening, but we didn't get any joy of that. So there. Okay, the next bit is sort of publishing, and the sequence of publishing. Based on Nobel Prize winning scientists, Elsevier came up with this idea of there are 3 phases in your career. The first one that many of you are at is getting established. And at that stage, you know, you publish where you can, when you can. Just get your work out there, get your name known. Don't worry about your publishing metrics, which we'll come on to, but just get it out there. If your work is good, it will now be found easily. No matter which journal you put it in, it'll be found. The second phase is consolidating. So you've got established. Now you can start, choosing your co-authors, choosing the best journals, going for the higher impact ones. For example, in IECS, our research company, and indeed in the institute I used to run, we would aim for the top quartile of journals in our field. Go for the best ones. So start reasonably high, and then if they don't like it, you can go down a bit. And then third, what is called the capitalizing stage, where you now have the luxury of synthesizing, writing review articles, chapters, books. You're encouraging younger researchers. I made the word there, or given the word there, proper review articles, because some review articles are just what are called literature descriptions. Blog said this, Brown says this, Green says this, whatever. They are just a description of the literature. What we're really after in many journals is we're after proper review articles, which are a review by experts in the field. And very often, many of the references in them will be by those by the author itself. So, for example, led by Alan, we've just produced a paper on trophic relations in fishes in estuaries, and of course that is summarizing a lot of the work that we've done. When you start publishing, you'll eventually get, or no, very soon you'll get various metrics about your papers. One of them is called the H-index. The H-index, it's a relationship between the number of citations and the number of papers that you've published. And it should go up by 1 for each productive year of research. But we'll come back to this. Okay, Alan.
Yeah, Mike, in terms of the South African career publishing route, students in South Africa, they do a BSc honours, which I don't think you do overseas. And you do a project in your honours year, and it is quite possible that if your project is sufficiently well worked out and it can be worthy of publication. So it does happen that a scientist's publication career can start at the honours level.
Yep.
Obviously, once you go on to the master's level, there's a big potential to start doing a lot of original research which can be published. But in both the master's level and the PhD level, often there's a review chapter that on your topic that you're studying, and be aware that you can in fact capitalize, as it were, on a particular research field by producing a review article fairly early on in your career through that route. But I think most scientists are going to do most of their synthesizing like we've done, and reviewing of review papers towards the end of our careers rather than at the beginning. But I think the postgraduate students and early scientists need to be aware that you can start doing publications very early on at the honors level, and that you can do reviews at the master's and the PhD level. The other thing I think that perhaps we should mention is that a lot of the papers that you do at both the honors level and the master's level, you're going to be co-authoring them probably with your supervisor. Whereas at the PhD level, you're probably going to be the sole author on a number of your chapters by virtue of the fact that the PhD is a very independent piece of research. Once you, let's say, have qualified with your PhD, be very aware that working in teams, in other words, look for teams where who have similar interests to you, where you would enjoy working with those people. In terms of publications, you can get far more out of your science by working with people as co-author, and then obviously in some cases you will be the lead author, and they will be joining you on that paper. And I think that makes science a lot more fun, and publishing a lot more fun as well.
Yeah, that's good. They're really important points there. Yes, in many countries we also have this the BSc, where there's a final year project, or a research project. I don't know of many that did get published there, although I think there's one very good friend of Alan and I, Steve Blaber in Australia. I think his undergraduate project was on something called IMPROSEX, well, it's now called IMPROSEX in dog whelks. I think he published that, and it was one of the first papers in his field, mid 1970s, if I remember rightly. But you're right. So you could get a paper from your BSc. Certainly, if you can get one paper out of your masters, that is really good, because that starts on your field there, and also it probably means that you're more likely to get a PhD place as well there. And we'll come on to the authors as well. The bit about I mentioned about writing proper review articles. When I said we have what's called a literature description and a literature review, very often the literature description is what we would unkindly call chapter 2 of a PhD. But if it's worth publishing, you've written it, try and get it published. Why not? People will still find it valuable there. You can see this this curve, and again, this makes the points that Alan made. Getting established, you're doing all or most of the work. By consolidating, you're doing much of the work, or you're supervising. And then by the capitalizing stage, you're the summarizing and synthesizing the work. And I say the aim, I think, for many of us is to still be within this there. Okay, the next thing is you've got to choose where you're going to publish. Sorry, I mean Alan's point about the supervising and where the authors of the journals will come on to this. The authors of the paper will come on to this in a minute. Yeah. Okay, the next thing is choosing the right journal. You want your papers to be read. So you don't want them to be buried, you don't want them to disappear without trace. You need to get them read. As you see on that list there, all the main publishers have ways of finding a journal, but actually and certainly Alan and Janine would echo this. The best source of which journal to publish in are the people you're working with, or the papers that you read. Your supervisor would tell you which journal to publish in. When you're doing the work, you'll see there's a set of papers that you're reading, and you'll suddenly realize that many of them are from the same journal. So sort of that immediately says, if that journal is publishing papers on your topic, that would be a good place to start with there. The second bullet point there, choose only one journal. When you submit a paper, you should only submit it to one journal. You shouldn't, but people do submit it to different journals at the same time, but they shouldn't. If we find that someone has submitted it to different journals and therefore is in danger of wasting people's time, we would probably immediately reject the paper. So we'll say there. But the best that's just the point that we've just made there. When you start looking at a journal, you'll start seeing not only do authors have metrics, but the journals have metrics as well. And actually journals have many metrics. The publishers measure everything. So everything that's going there. They measure things like the time that it takes to get the paper submitted and published. Yesterday, I was responding to an author of a paper submitted to Estuarine and Coastal Shelf Science, and they were saying their paper had been under review now for over 6 months, I think. What was happening, whether it was stuck. And I had to say to them, we've just had so many problems finding referees. I hate to say it, but nobody seemed to want to referee their paper, which is a problem. And that's why it was taking so much time. The journal have metrics, and one of the main things that you would look at on the journal homepage is the impact factor of the journal. That is how many times that the papers in that journal are cited. Because of course you want to choose a journal where the papers get cited a lot. Now journals have various impact factors. As you see there, they have a 2-year impact factor. That is, how many times has a paper been cited in the first 2 years of its life? And then there's a 5-year impact factor, and also you can have a 10-year impact factor. Many of the ecology journals have a higher 5-year impact factor than a 2-year one, mostly because our papers keep getting cited over a longer period. But when a journal gives its impact factor, it usually uses the 2-year one. And this is really dominated by the biomedical field, the molecular biology field, physics fields, and so on, where if papers don't get cited within the first few months, they're lost because the field is moving so quickly. Whereas in ecology, they do last a longer time there. Now, just remember that journal papers get cited. Some papers get cited. Some papers never get cited. Some papers get cited once or twice, and some papers get cited maybe hundreds or even in some cases thousands of times. What you're wanting, and we'll come back to this later, you're wanting your paper to be read, to be cited, and so on. So there are these metrics, and even down there, as it says, the usage metrics. That is not just whether people are citing the papers, but did they download them? Did they mention them in Twitter or Facebook or whatever? So anything to say, is the paper being picked up there? So this, you see, the way of calculating the impact factors, the number of times articles were published in a certain journal, and then the number of articles, the number of citations, and the number of articles produced, sort of thing. Everybody has citation indices. Once you start publishing, you should you should register for a Google Scholar record, and you will automatically get records in things like Scopus or Web of Science. So you should automatically get some of these things, but Google Scholar is one that people very often look at. And Google Scholar will find your articles, whether it's a published science article or a report or a book as well. So there, okay. So you can see online, you can see what are the high impact journals, and then are those the ones that you aim for, and you can do this in each field there. Okay, so things like if you look on the journal homepage or you search for a journal, this is the sort of things that you'll see. This happens to be looking at a particular paper, and you'll see. So this paper was published in 2021. So of course there's no citations up to then. It then increased a few, and then it tailed off. And by 3 years after publication, it's not getting cited at all. Whereas what we're hoping is our papers keep getting cited. And there are many metrics. There's massive numbers of metrics. And this is what the journals and the publishers rely on. They want to make sure they're publishing papers, the papers are getting cited. One thing that it's only recently we've had to put this in and consider this when we're publishing, and this is AI or AI assisted technologies. Things like ChatGPT, for example. We can't ignore this. We can't ignore the fact that people are going to use the AI in writing their papers, in finding the literature, in helping them with the work. So now what happens is journals are asking for a statement and a declaration on the way AI has been used. It's something that most of us are not happy with. Recently there was a group of researchers at Plymouth, one of the Plymouth universities, not the University of Plymouth, the other one in the city, and they wrote a paper using AI, using ChatGPT, submitted it to a journal, told the editor what they'd done, because they wanted to see how a referee would judge a paper written by ChatGPT. And you won't be surprised to hear that the referee said that the paper, it was okay, it was nothing special, it had got a few mistakes in it, it had got mistakes in its references, but it was sort of okay, it wasn't brilliant. And as AI gets better and better, then unfortunately it's going to be more and more difficult determining whether or not a paper has been created by AI. So just be careful about it. I know non-native English speakers who use ChatGPT to check the language. They write the paper, then they put it through ChatGPT in order just to check the language. And I say you can do this, but just be careful. And now you have to cite that you have done it there. So all of this means that we need now to think about human accountability, the responsibility in publishing, the ethics of doing this, and so on. So just think about these things. It all leads to scientific integrity there. Right, now let's get on to the meaty bit. When we're writing a paper, as we mentioned earlier, there are several types of articles that you can write. There's the normal full articles, a normal piece of research. You know, you've been out, you may have done the sampling, you've done the analysis, you've done the data treatment and so on. It's a full article. So it's substantial, it's complete, comprehensive, and it's probably a paper of 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 words there. The other sort is a letter or a short communication, and all of us have used this. to try and you've got an idea, you haven't got every bit of information, but it seems to be a good idea. It's something worthy, and also you want people not only to realize it's your idea, but actually to comment on it as well. So use either a letter or a short communication. That is, get the idea out there so that people know the idea is yours. And then what you can do is then go and write the full article. The next one is the bit that Alan and I talked about just now, these review papers. What are the summaries of recent developments on a topic? As I say, some of them are submitted by invitation, or they're by people leading in the field. And the point I make there about the literature review difference from the literature description. Now, all journals can look at their papers and they can give what is called a citation half-life. How long is it that your paper keeps being cited after you've published it? And this is the graph that you see there is as an indication of that. A short note, the red line, that disappears quite quickly. No, it was a good idea, but it'll probably be superseded by a full article. But it'll get a lot of citations to start with, and then it'll just peter off. Then we've got articles there, the normal articles, and they have try and get rid of that. And the articles, they will last a long time. Not as high a citation, but they might last longer. This green line is probably for articles in ecology, probably in the life sciences. If it was in the medical sciences, it would be steeper at the beginning and then would tail off very quickly. And then, of course, there's the blue line, the review article that takes longer to build up, but then they last a lot longer. A review will keep being cited for many years. Within this, there are different types of papers, and I'll suggest to you now, if you want a paper to have a lot of citations and keep being used for a long time, write a paper about methods. Sort of devise the method, publish the paper about methods, and write that there. Yeah. Oh, okay, Alan.
Yeah, Mike. I think also we should add that if you're doing a review paper, you would have identified gaps in that particular field, and that's very helpful on the way forward. So, in other words, people reading the review, particularly the people who are going to be interested, are also experts in that field, and it actually provides ideas to people to what to do in the future. And so the relevance of the review outlives the past information that you're putting together. It's also creating a platform for the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if you remember this scientific method, scientific method, if you read people like Popper or Peter Medawar or so, that talk about, the way we do it. We come up with a hypothesis, we test a hypothesis, and then we revise the hypothesis or we reject the hypothesis, and we keep going. And within that, your hypothesis is going to come from various directions. One, it might come from work you've already done, or, as Alan's just said, it might come from a review of the literature. You've read all this literature, you've come up with an idea, let's call the idea a hypothesis that we want to test. And as Alan mentioned, the best reviews have got that in. It's the same, those of you who are doing any thesis at the moment, whether it's an honours thesis, a master's or a PhD, towards the end of that thesis, you should have a section of suggestions for further work. And that suggestions for further work may be, here's the next hypothesis for testing there. So so there are these different sorts of papers there. The next one is read the guide for the authors. Every journal has a home page, and on the home page it will tell you what the guide for it'll tell you the guide for authors. It'll tell you how the journal wants it written and submitted and so on. Ocean and Coastal Management is a sister journal to Estuarine, Coastal and Shelf Science that obviously takes more of the management side. And we've just got a paper we're just about to submit to this. It's probably going in this week. So read the journal, read the contents page for the home page for the journal, and that will tell you about how they want it written. When you're writing it, for good or evil, the language of science is English. It used to differ. For example, in engineering and chemistry, the language used to be German. Now, mostly because of not necessarily the English-speaking other countries, but certainly the American influence, English is the language of science. Now, those of us who are native English speakers, like Janine, Alan, and myself, we have an advantage. We are writing in our native language. I can't understand how difficult it would be, or I can't comprehend how difficult it is to write in another language. I've done it a bit. I've translated bits into French or from French, but I'm full of admiration for people who have to write not in their native language. Unfortunately, this is the nature of the science at the moment, and we have to write in English. Now, when Alan and I and Janine, when we're looking at papers, we are not looking for perfect English. We're looking for understandable English. We want to make sure that the paper can be read and understood. As we say, as it says at the beginning there, if the language is poor, it might delay or block publication. It might not even be sent out for refereeing. It actually, in some cases, it might not even be sent to the editor because the language is not good enough, and it would be wasting the time of the editors and referees. So just be careful. You can get you can get guidance on this, but very often getting someone to check your manuscript. Now, this is probably not the case for most people online, although I know I would imagine some of you can speak many more languages than I can. But get it checked. Your supervisor will check it, and so on. Use a grammar check and the spelling check. They're tools to do that. Do publishers correct the language? No, it's the author's responsibility. It used to be a case where the editors and associated editors, where we would go through an edited paper for its language. Unfortunately now, because there's so many papers, we don't get a chance to do that now. I used to go through every paper in IECS and edit the language. I can't do that now. I just don't have time. So we're really making sure the authors are doing that there. Okay, the next thing is, yeah, Janine, great, go ahead.
I just wanted to share, Mark, and everybody else participating, please share as we go along your experiences, because some of us were not impressed. There were about 80% of us on the article are English speaking, and a reviewer probably just seeing, I don't know, country bias. They said, no, we must get our paper reviewed by an English speaking person. So we weren't impressed. But yeah, as a reviewer, I mean, we're so used to improving the language of students' works and other works that I will automatically correct the language as well as the science, even if it's not required of me. I think as reviewers, we do that. Is that the norm?
Yep. That's interesting. And that you're right. We all spend a lot of our time editing things. Just a bit about the names. I hate to say it, but I had one referee, and I will mention the country because it's from the US, a referee who he turned down the chance to referee a paper. I've told you now it's a he and it's in the US, so that's narrowed it down to a couple of 100 million or whatever it is. He said he didn't referee papers by non-native English speakers. Now, normally I don't respond to comments like that. I just ignore them because I think it's quite sad. But in this case, I did respond. And I mentioned to this person in the US that two things. Firstly, as far as I can see, there's a huge number of people in the US whose names are not typically Anglo-Saxon. Adams and Whitfield and Elliott are fairly Anglo-Saxon, but there are many that aren't because it's a country full of immigrants. So I didn't know how he determined this. Secondly, the fact that, as far as I understand, within a few years, there's going to be a majority of non-native English speakers in the US, primarily Spanish speakers. So is he going to discriminate against that? And as Janine just mentioned, I have also been in papers where the first author has obviously not been an Anglo-Saxon name, and the referee has said, get the language checked by a native English speaker, for which we then have to write back and say, oh, by the way, 4 of the 5 authors are native English speakers or whatever it is. So, yeah, it's the sort of thing that rankles, especially if you get to the stage of rejecting papers because they're non-native English speakers. But there, so you've got the resources, and your supervisors are probably the best resources in this. Okay, the next question then is, you want your paper to be discoverable after you've written it, and there are ways of making sure that's the case there. When search engines look for papers, they've got various things to go on. They can go on the title, they can search them according to their authors. There, of course, there's a link, a DOI number. It's got a set of highlights, and the highlights it can search. It's got words in the abstract, and it's got keywords. And the paper, the search engine will use all of those to find and record papers. I mean, now we've got an amazing resource in the internet, the ease of finding papers, that when certainly when Alan and I started, well, possibly Janine as well, that there was no way of finding papers as easy as this. Now you can find them as easy as possible, sort of thing there. So make sure all of those things are correct. They're all as you want them to be, because that's the way your papers are going to be found there. No. So this shows the way those repositories do look for papers, where they can pick up a graphical abstract, they can show the links with data, they can show the highlights and so on. And as it mentions at the bottom there, some journals are now asking you to submit a tweet as well. So when you're planning an article, these are all the things that you're going to have in it. Fortunately, the journals we're dealing with don't ask for tweets yet. Or are they still called tweets, or are they called X's or something? But anyway, our journals aren't asking for a tweet, but certainly a lot of the medical journals are, because they want to send a tweet about your paper to these high-powered medics, so they can read it while they're having their breakfast. But we're not at that stage yet. So making sure you've got all of these things in it, right? The general structure of it. Oh yes, Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, just on the keywords in the title, a number of journals, they actually insist on you not repeating any keywords from the title in your keyword selection. And I think people should take great care about their keywords, because that, you know, if you're searching for an article, you use keywords, and if your keywords aren't going to be picked up by the search engine, then you're wasting keywords, because you often have a limited number of keywords. You can't have an unlimited number. So I think as scientists, we need to pay careful attention to the keywords, and then not duplicate those keywords, or we must make sure they aren't duplicated in the title already, because obviously all search engines will pick up the title as being an important source of keywords anyway. But pay particular attention to the keyword section, that you're using words that people are likely to use if they're looking for the content of your paper.
That's right. That's it. Exactly. It's a really good point there. It says you only have a few words. Your title can't be too long. You know, the keywords can't be too many. So don't waste them by duplicating them. They'll find them one way or another. And that's good point there. Okay, right. So the next one is we need to go through the structure and what is in each part of the paper. In fact, this first block there, the block at the top, is reinforcing the point Alan's just made. By having all of these things, you can find that the paper can be easily found, easily indexed, and it can be advertised to potential readers there. Now, remember that of the people seeing your paper, 100% of the people that see your paper will read the title. Okay, so that's quite important. They've obviously looked at it because they're interested in the topic. So probably might be 80% of those might read the abstract or the keywords or have a look at the visual abstract there. So it might be there. But the number of people reading the rest of it starts decreasing, because authors tend to read a paper for a particular reason. They might need it for the methods. They might need it for the data that's in it. They might need it for the conclusion. But very few people, I don't know how the journals work all this out, but they do have they have statistics for how much someone reads in a paper. Perhaps they do it by a focus group or something. But there are very few people read the whole thing. And dare I say it, there was a lot of papers where the only people that have read the paper were the authors, the referees, and perhaps the editor. So that might be 5 people. So there are, in the last statistics I saw, there was something like 40% of all papers don't get cited again. So that means 40% of papers, nobody else has read them and used them apart from the authors and referees. There may be another 40% of papers that only get cited a handful of times. No, 2, 3, 4, 5 times or whatever. Probably up to 10 times. So that's 80%. So the final 20% of papers, they're the ones that get cited a lot. And I think in IECS, I don't know what our record is, but we did have one paper that was cited 90 times in the 2-year impact factor period. So when the journal gives an impact factor, it is usually based on those last 20%. So what you're trying to do is you want your paper to be cited. So you're trying to write it and propose it and so on in order to give all of this information. Yes, Janine.
Mike, I just wanted your advice. If we look back at our published papers, if we make it place-based, like the study of whatever in such and such a estuary in South Africa, we find that these are not cited going forward unless it's by other South Africans working on that estuary. What are your suggestions there to maybe use more general titles? Because we're moving that way, and you know, we have this one paper on, it's on metals and plants in the Swartkops estuary. Swartkops estuary isn't in the title, and it's one of the most cited papers of ours historically.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think we come on to the title in a minute, but as you mentioned it, you have to be careful with geographical case studies. Now in estuarine and coastal shelf science, and we've all come across this problem. We don't have the space in the journal, or we're told we don't have the space in order to carry a geographical case study. What we're looking for are papers that give information or concepts about the estuaries, coasts, and shelf science that will interest people worldwide. And the problem is that if you put the place name in the title, you might all of a sudden stop people reading it. So what we tell people, and some people might have seen messages from me with this in it, where we are after papers that, yes, of course, they were created from a geographic area, but the information in them, as you said about the Swartkops, that it's relevant to many estuaries worldwide. Elsevier a few years ago now started a new journal called Regional Studies in Marine Science, and that journal is especially for geographic-based papers. It's now getting a good impact factor as well, but it's for those papers that the rest of us were saying we can't take. It's good science, it's good information, but it's really restricted information, restricted interest there. So be careful thinking about putting a place name in the title. I'll come on to titles in a minute, because there are a few tricks where you can get your papers, get your papers noticed, sort of thing there. So, okay. This came up earlier. Alan mentioned it, I think, and this is the authorships of your paper. The things that you should do and don't do and don't do. I mean, usually the first author that's the most important person. It's probably the person that did most of the research. They might have been the one that supervised it all and presented it and interpreted it. They led on the paper. They were the one that put the paper together. They submitted it very often, and so on. There. Sometimes you can get the first author is different from the person who submits the paper to the journal. That's what is called the corresponding author. And this sometimes happens where the first author is going to leave the university because they're graduating, and they don't know where they're going to be. They don't know what their email address will be when they move. Therefore, the paper is submitted by their supervisor. But very often, the first author is not only doing all the work, but also submitting it. Then you have the co-authors, and all of these should be able to defend the paper. There's you see the note there. There's a thing called the Vancouver Protocol. The Vancouver Protocol says that everybody who is an author of that paper should be able to defend the paper. They should be able to defend all the parts of the paper. They don't have to have done them all. You know, they don't have to have done all the data analysis or done all the chemical analysis or whatever. They don't have to have done it all, but they should be able to defend why it should be done. Of the co-authors, there might be one was responsible for the field side of it, one was the laboratory analysis, one was the data analysis, and so on. They're all responsible for a particular aspect. all the authors should also review the draft of the papers. Remember, it's all got your name on it. It's got all your names on it. As you see on the other side, there are abuses to be avoided. Ghost authors. You've forgot to include someone who really should have been there. You know, someone did the data analysis and you forgot to put them in there. But then the other one is the scientific writers and gift authors, including authors when they did not contribute significantly. Now, as you would understand, Janine, Allen, and I, we often get requests to, especially by non-native English speakers or people in developing countries, would we help them write the paper? Would we join with them as an author? I have, and I'm sure Janine and Alan also have the same ethos, that I don't need to be an author of a paper unless I've done a lot on that paper to warrant being there. If I've just helped them a bit, then put me as an acknowledgement. You know, they don't have to put me as an author. Nowadays, we've got a lot of, Alan mentioned about teams of authors, and we have, especially in Europe, we have very large European projects. I'm part of various projects where we have hundreds of people in the project. And in some cases, many of those want to be authors, or they should be authors because they helped to write the project or whatever, or they think they should. I've actually pulled myself off papers where I've not done enough to warrant an author, even though an authorship, even though the people leading the paper said, no, we really think you should be there. And I said, no, I haven't done anything. But I also know some authors who the only thing that they've done is check that their address was right on the paper. They've not done anything else. And that, I think, is an abuse of the system, which is why we now have papers. In the medical field, we have papers with thousands of authors on them. So a colleague at my university who's part of a global health group, and they have hundreds, if not thousands, of authors on their papers, which I think is credible. It's there. So be careful who is there, sort of thing. Yeah, and also be consistent there. And that. Now let's go through. This depends on each person, and perhaps Janine and Alan can also comment on this. I'll mention the way we do many of these things. Building the article, we very often, it's quite easy to write the methods because that's fairly standard there. If I'm doing a data-based paper, I do less of them now than I used to. If I'm doing data paper, I start off with a pile of tables and a pile of figures, and then I start making notes about what they mean there. As I'm writing what the results, tables and figures mean, I put square brackets in my text that say, for discussion, mention this part. So eventually, each of those comments in square brackets become probably a paragraph in the discussion. And I'm busy doing that at the moment there. You can very often start formulating your conclusions by this stage. Oh yes, I know the main points of this. You can then write the introduction. I mean, many of us would have had the notes for the introduction fairly early on because they are, and I'll talk through what all the parts of the introduction are, but you've already got the ideas in mind. Then you've got the keywords and highlights, and then finally you come up with the title and abstract. Now, with many of these, actually, this bit, the figures and tables, that should have come up earlier on this. This is the way we would write some. In other ways, no, I might start with the abstract. No, we've given a paper to conference. we wrote the abstract for the paper. Now we write the paper based on that. But I don't know if Alan and Janine want to comment on the way they build the articles, things. Yeah, Alan.
Yeah, Mike, just a couple of points. You know, a lot of people, when they see a paper, they think the hypothesis was the start. Sometimes the hypothesis can actually come. The ideal hypothesis is later in the stage, sort of when you're doing the introduction in the order you suggested it. So while you are doing your results and discussion, you actually find, well, this would be a really wonderful hypothesis which would fit what you've been writing about, but you may not have actually thought about that hypothesis at the very beginning when you wrote the paper.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is could be important. I like to break up a paper, whether it's a review or a descriptive, an actual original paper, with figures in particular, but also with tables. In other words, try not to have the paper too text heavy. And what you find is people looking at a paper, you know, from the outside, very often, as you said earlier, they will scan the title, they'll scan the abstract, and they will look at the figures. They may not read the text, but they will look at the figures. And if you've got particularly some nice conceptual figures that carry the message of your paper very well, they will take notice of them, and they make a big impression on the person looking at your paper, and may even lead them to actually read the text. But don't underestimate the value of good figures in a paper.
Yeah, exactly. And we mentioned earlier about the graphical abstract. Have a look in the future of how many graphical abstracts actually get picked up by people writing textbooks, for example. And as Alan says, good conceptual figures, they actually, if they summarize a lot of the ideas, then they're the ones that people will pick up. And have a look in textbooks, undergraduate textbooks, the way they use those sort of thing there. So yeah, that's quite important. So each article may be different, but yeah, we need those. Okay, the first thing, the titles, and Janine mentioned this just now. You know, this is your chance to attract the reader's attention. You don't want it to be too long. No, it doesn't have to be a long sentence, but it has to have enough words in it so that it tells the reader what's coming. No, informative but concise, identifying the main issue. Not using technical jargon, because that will just turn the reader off. If they don't understand it, they won't read any further there. And be careful with abbreviations. No, there are certain things like, I know, eDNA or whatever. They're now so common you can use those in a title, but be careful. There, avoiding case studies. So this is what Janine was talking about. If the journal is based on case studies like the regional studies, then fine. Otherwise, just be careful about it, because you don't want the referees and the editors to say, oh, it's only relevant for a certain area, then we don't, we're not going to take it. And then the final bit there, the colons, question marks, humor, improved citations. The publishers have got data on all of this, and they know that if you put a colon in the title, you get more citations. If you put a question mark in it, or you've got a humorous comment, it improves citations. And as an example, in a paper I published last year, I put a line from a Leonard Cohen song in it that I'd been wanting to use for a long time. And as long as you know the Leonard Cohen song, then that means something there. But you remember, this is your first chance to get someone's attention, as we've said there about a catchy title. Yes. So yeah, I think we've just said that you're trying to get people to read it, and that there. The highlights and keywords are so this is these are labels. They're used by indexing and abstracting services and so on. And again, make sure you only use established abbreviations. Alan's point earlier, don't repeat the words in the title because you're just duplicating then. And then the highlights being specific and usually a set number of characters, 85. I have absolutely no idea why the highlights should be 85 characters. It's a bit like tweets used to be 140 characters and now whatever it is, 250 or something. But for some reason, we have highlights that are 85 characters. And the paper I mentioned earlier that we're just about to send off, last night, I was going over the highlights and trying to get them down to 85 characters. But there. So say there. But you're given these. There, that's. Okay, so the next one is the abstract. Oh, sorry, I should have said that this presentation, Janine can send it. I'll send her the PDF version, and she can send it out to you all so you can read all this later. We have no problem in you using it for whatever you want to use it for, sort of thing. So that gives you a chance to read things later. Now remember, the abstract, it's standalone. That is, it shouldn't have any references in it. It should only be one paragraph, but it should tell you everything. It should say, why are we studying this? What did we do? What did we find? What did it mean? It's everything there. It's your chance to grab the reader. It should be understandable and interesting as well, but it should encourage the reader to go further. Now we do get, Alan and I mentioned earlier about review articles, and it is easy to see whether a review article has been written just based on the abstracts. People haven't read the papers. So I say, just be careful how you use abstracts there. As I said, the abstract should cover everything there. That's okay. The next thing is the introduction. So what you're going to do, and Alan touched on this just now, what you're going to do is you're going to say, what is the background? Why am I saying there's a problem that needs to be studied? What is known, what's not known, and therefore why are we going to do the work? Sort of, why has the previous work not answered that questions? So what we're going to achieve now, that there. The perspective consistent with the nature of the journal, that's of course, yes, because otherwise there. Be careful saying this is the first studies. We often get this. Someone will say, this is the first study, or this is a novel study. And then one of the referees that's probably as long in the tooth as Alan and I would say, no, actually, I remember a paper in 1983 that said exactly this. So just be careful. Whether you're writing a paper or you're writing your thesis, these last 3 bullet points are important. Giving the aim or the aims, the big idea, usually one sentence, maybe the title of your thesis. So the aim is the big idea. The objectives, a set of bullet points, possibly what did you do to reach the aims? And then the hypotheses, as Alan said, in some fields, you can't give them as a hypothesis, but you can give it as a testable question. If you give the hypothesis correctly, they will actually guide what statistical analysis you will need for it. And that. Now, I would always say to all my students, once you've got the aims, the objectives, and the hypotheses clearly, then the paper should actually write itself. So should your thesis. If you're writing a thesis, the objectives, maybe each chapter of your thesis has got a different objective there and that. So there. if you're writing your thesis that will have a set of papers in it, and no, I've had students where they've had 7 papers in their thesis. It's very easy to write to use the introduction as almost the same one for each of those papers. Well, you shouldn't do that. You should write a unique introduction for each one. But I say just be careful about doing that there. Okay, the methods is usually the easiest thing to write. What was done, how you did it. So again, what is the problem? Why do you need a method for it? What methods have you given? You know, if you need to describe the study site, but don't give masses of information. Yeah, Minion, great to hear from you. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I just want to jump back to the abstract section. Do you have any advice on how to keep an abstract short and concise when your methods and results are exceptionally long?
Yeah, that I think you might have just answered it yourself there. That you don't have to give all the methods and results in your abstract. What you're having to do is say, this is the sort of method we use. You know, we did it by, eDNA techniques were used, or sampling analysis went and did this. So you don't have to give, if you start giving, we went out in and every 2 months we mentioned that we measured this, and this is how many samples we took, and this is what we did with the samples, then you're in danger of just repeating the methods. And it's the same results. Tell people what the main things are about the results. You don't have to give every result. And very often, if you start putting things like p-values in the abstract, you might think, actually, you're giving too much information. Say what they mean rather than what the result is. So if that helps. So you're trying to say, what are the main points of this? Not everything I did, but I think you'll see in a minute. We'll come on to this as well, sort of thing there. So with the methods, as I said just then, you don't to Minion, you don't have to give every bit of information. What you can do now is, well, what you very often do is, if you've used previously published procedures, you just have to refer to them. You know, you used blogs 1999 as your basic method, and then just say whether or not you gave it differently from that. But what you can do now is give lots of information in the supplementary information. You can write huge amounts of details there. And as I say at the bottom there, if you want now, you can upload a video of how you did the sampling. Show people how you actually did the technique. That's really valuable there. You're having to identify the equipment and materials, but just be careful. Remember, what you're trying to do is give someone enough information so they could repeat your work, but you don't have to tell them everything. They can go and read this as well. And that. Yes, Alan.
Yeah, Mike. In some cases, the supplementary information is a bit more distant than an appendix. So some journals will allow an appendix which is visible at the end of the, after your references, whereas the supplementary information, you go to a website or whatever to find it. So depending on how close the additional information, let's say it's a species list that you'd rather have close to the paper, you put it as an appendix. But if it's, let's say, species by site or something like that, which is more distantly relevant, that would go as supplementary information.
Yeah, that's a good point. I get annoyed with journals because they don't. What they should do is almost when you download the PDF, you should automatically download the supplementary information, but they don't. They'll give a little link in it. So you have to go and download it from as Alan says, download it from another site. They should really sort of block the two things together. But you're right. It's whether or not, if it's some information you really need in order to understand the paper, it should be in the paper. If you need it for those that have got a really keen interest in specific areas, but it should be attached to the paper, give it as an appendix. So, as Alan says, some journals allow appendices, others don't. They will tell you to put them as supplementary material. Some cases, I think we've probably done this, where we've had very big tables, we've put them as an appendix so that we know it doesn't disturb the flow of reading the paper. But then the appendices, and say in the supplementary material, you could put the statistical outputs, or you could put any of the other information. I'll come on to the tables and things in a minute there and that there. Okay. More and more important, back to the ethics, is needing ethic approval. So any work done on most animals, or many animals, certainly all vertebrates and some invertebrates, such as cephalopods and so some of the larger crustaceans, you need ethical approval. If you've done anything with humans involved, then of course you need ethic approval. But each university, NMMU, will have its ethics committee to tell you this. There. Okay, so the next one is the results. What did you find in all this? So you're interesting in giving the data the primary importance, as it says there, the subsidiary data can be included. Use subheadings because you really want to make sure it looks logical, clear and easy. Highlight the main things. You don't need to describe a graph or a table in every detail. You know, if you find yourself saying, as you can see in figure 1, the line goes up at this place, then it goes down again, then it goes up again, you're probably giving too much detail. The reader can see those anyway. Using the objectives and hypotheses, they should be able to, or they should be there to tell you the way to put things in. And especially, as I said earlier, the hypotheses should tell you if your objective has been to look at the relationship between something and something else, then your hypothesis should be something to do with a correlation or a causation between features. Feature the unexpected findings. What differs from what you really would have expected? Giving enough statistical analysis and the assumptions used, and referees will often pull up the statistical analysis because it's one of the easiest things to comment on in a paper. In illustrations and figures, you don't need to have a table repeats a figure and vice versa. You only need one of them. But what is fairly common is to have a figure in the manuscript, in the body of the paper, and then have the table of the data, put that as supplementary information, because it may be, or what you want to encourage is someone to use your data in order to know if they want to do a meta-analysis of something. And then the final bit at the bottom there, writing in past tense for what you did and what the area was like when you did it, but the present tense for what the data show. So what you did was this, but the data now show this, and this sort of things there. And that. The discussion is that this is very often the section that if many of us, if we gloss over the results and the methods section, it's very often the discussion, which is what we're interested in. And I'm sure Alan and Janine have heard me say things like so what if, and then. You've told me something, so what? Why should I be interested? You've told me something. Well, what if something else happens? And then I work with geographers, and they often say, and then you've told me something, and then what happens there? So you're going to interpret and interrogate your results. You make sure the results correspond to the discussion corresponds to results. You're going to compare and contrast your results with others. But one thing that you might find yourself, one mistake you might make is giving everyone else's results first and then give your own. Say, well, Green found this, and Bloggs et al. Found this, and Brown et al. Found this, and in this study we found this. Well, don't do it the other way around. Yours is the most important results. You found this, and now how does that compare with published results? Go through, make sure your aim, the objectives, and hypothesis have been tackled. Give a critique of your work. That is, what could be done differently? What would you have done? What will you do next? And then indicate how your results can be used and taken further, and suggestions for further work. I mean, you can give a critique of your work without being critical of it. That is, you can say, well, this is what it showed, but there is the need for this, this, and this. And this is what Alan mentioned earlier. You've now done all this. And by this stage, you are probably creating new hypotheses. And those new hypotheses should be, they're going to be suggestions in your further work there and that there. And that. Be careful with various statements. Don't go further beyond. Don't speculate. But what you can do is give hypotheses. So speculation, be careful, don't do that. But you can say, well, based on what we know, this may happen, and this is the hypothesis for the next study, sort of thing there. Yeah. Yes, Alan, go for it.
Yeah, Mike, something that I think is maybe allowed in some journals and not others, and can be quite useful, is a conclusion section, which is not the same as what is in the discussion, and it shouldn't necessarily be the same as what you've got in your abstract, because it's written in a different way. In fact, in many cases, the conclusions could be a series of points. But it also, the conclusions play a role in putting down the main points in a sequence, not in a descriptive paragraph like your abstract is. And it serves to emphasize what are the key issues that have arisen from your study in an unambiguous way.
Yeah, exactly. It's the ones. Remember, when you're very often when you're giving a talk, people will say to you, there's only a few rules. One is tell people what you're going to tell them, then tell them it, and then tell them what you've told them. And that's the same with a paper. You've started off by saying, this is what we knew before, but what we didn't know is this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm telling you how we're going to answer that. Here's what we found. And now, as Alan says, by the conclusions, and here's what we do. If any of you are going to be defending your theses, I can give you a set of questions that external examiners like asking during a thesis defense. And one of them is that I always use is, what do we know now that we didn't know when you started? And that really should summarize it, be summarized in the conclusions and that there. And this the same thing there. So with the conclusions, sorry, with my slides, it keeps me moving the top bit from the screen. But so the conclusions, they're going to help someone say, how important is your work? It is in justification of your work. As Alan mentioned, don't repeat the abstract because they are different. The abstract is the whole thing. The conclusion is, well, what did we find there? You don't have to list any experimental results. You don't you don't need to give any p-values. You shouldn't cite references, and you shouldn't introduce anything new in the conclusions. You shouldn't suddenly come up with a new concept. You should have introduced that earlier in the paper. Yeah. So I bet you can end up with, now we know this, then what is the next stage there, and that. And then just looking at the time, the acknowledgements, these become very important. Make sure you give your advisors, if they are not authors of the paper, very often they may be authors of the papers. Certainly you have to acknowledge any funding, any grants and so on that you got, mostly because those grant schemes and funding, they will want to know what you did with their money. And so this there. So language advisors, proofreaders, suppliers. I mean, we've left typists in there. I don't know anyone that uses a typist these. No, actually, I do know people who use typists, but it's less common. Suppliers, and then a referee and editor. When you're revising your paper after it's being refereed, if the referees and editors have been helpful, then mention it. You know, you might not know their names, but they know who did it, and they might remember that you thanked them there and that there. So references. This is something that we all have trouble with, using too many references. If it's a review, that's fine, but be careful how many references you use there. Make sure you've used them. Avoid excessive self-citations. This again is a problem for many of us. If we're writing a review, then we have to review our own work, because we've spent many years working on it there. Avoid excessive citations, conform strictly to the style given, and so on. Use a reference management software. Now, I don't use a reference management software because I find them even more trouble than they're worth when I want to amend reference lists. But you can use it there. Some journals will look at your paper, and if you haven't referred to their papers in that journal, they might use that as a way of rejecting your paper. So be careful. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons you're choosing a journal is because they publish papers that you're interested in there. Okay, submission. The first part of the submission is you get chance to write a cover letter. You are now trying to sell your work to the editor. You don't have to repeat the manuscript. The manuscript. You don't have to repeat the abstract, but say why it's important. Why is it this journal? Why did you choose them? What is the main important bits in it and that? You will be asked to nominate or to suggest, rather, not nominate, reviewers, but you can also indicate who you don't want to be a reviewer, what is called an opposing reviewer. You can also indicate why your paper shouldn't go to certain reviewers. It may be because they don't believe your ideas, or you know, your supervisor had an argument with them, or whatever, but you're allowed to say this and that. If the paper has been based on something else, a previous conference paper, and it's now been extended, or it's been modified after submitted and rejected, then you can mention this. You have to be a bit careful, because if you start mentioning that your paper has just been rejected by so many journals, then all that does is it gives the editor an excuse to reject it as well. no, taking the view, well, if nobody else wanted it, we don't want it either. So be careful. We don't reject a manuscript because a cover letter is bad, but a good cover letter may accelerate the editorial process. Remember, as Alan and I, Janine, see a paper, we read the cover note, the cover letter, and that highlights to us, why this paper is going to be interesting. And then the last bullet point there, and it's something that one of my postgraduates has just done, and we suddenly realized it too late. We'd submitted a paper to a journal. They'd written back saying it wasn't suitable in the scope of the journal. We thought it was, but they didn't think it was. So we submitted it somewhere else. And in her haste to get the paper resubmitted, my student forgot to change the name of the journal in the cover letter. So we quickly had to apologize to the editor, but we hope that he didn't hold it against us there. And that reviewers, as I mentioned, you can suggest them. They shouldn't be people who've got direct colleagues with. They should be international ones. And remember, you're helping the editor in this. That last point there, the bullet point, this is something there's two bullet points there. One is about the institutional email address, and then the last point about a fictitious referee. We've been told to be wary of non-institutional email addresses because it could be, the last point there, it could be a fictitious referee. And there are examples of authors making up a fictitious person email, giving their email address, which then comes back to the author. And of course, the author then says, this is a brilliant paper, you should accept it without any changes. And it's a bit naughty. So just be careful, this and that. Be careful, don't give friends or colleagues, or even if we get referee suggestions where all the referee suggestions are all from the country of the author, then we would say what the author is telling us is the paper is local, of local interest, and it might give a reason to reject it there and that. Your paper then goes out to refereeing. Now, this is where Alan and I and Janine would not only want to tell you about refereeing, but we want to encourage you to be referees as well. If you're writing papers, you should be able to referee papers. And even if you think, oh, well, I'm very junior, I can't start refereeing papers, you can. If you're experienced enough to write a paper, you are experienced enough to referee a paper. And you can always write to a journal and say you are willing to referee a paper. So these are the reasons why we have peer review. It is to check, is it good science? Is it important? Has the paper already been published elsewhere, or is there plagiarism in it and that? And the bottom point there is, without peer review, there's no control in scientific communication. It's what we use in order to make sure papers are good science. There, if we didn't, the alternative to not having peer review is everybody submits everything. We just upload everything to the web, and then people can use it or criticize it as we want. Well, that would give us very good information there. So there. I hope that you would get invited to referee, and no, if Alan or Janine is handling a paper, then there is no problem for them asking one of their colleagues or one of their graduate students in order to referee it, and we hope you would accept it. And there is various reasons of why we review. It's part of your academic duty to it. If you want your papers published, you should then be able to referee other people's. It's a way of mentoring people. Perversely, that third point there, enjoyment in reviewing, it's you're seeing. It's actually the last point there as well. You're seeing work before it's published. And it's the papers you read and you go, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. That's a great advance in the field. Makes you aware of new research, and it helps your research as well, sort of thing there. It can further career development because you get kudos for refereeing. You can add it to your CV. It helps your own research on your new ideas. It makes you associated with journals and editors. So associate editors like Janine and Alan, and editor-in-chief like myself, we all had to start off by refereeing papers, and eventually you become an associate editor or an editor, and keeping updates. And then the final point, because all papers need we need at least 2 reviewers, then we need people to referee more papers than you submit. And I work on the basis that you should really, for every paper you submit, you should referee probably 4 or 5. And I suspect Alan and Janine and I probably referee more than that there. So it is important. It's how the system works. Accepting or rejecting. And as I mentioned earlier, we all have papers rejected. So you submit the journal to the article to the journal. The editor screens the paper. Sometimes the publishers might screen it if it's not complete, or in some cases if the English is just not good enough to send to the editor. But very often it goes to the editor. We then look at it. We might then reject it immediately or recommend it for transferring after screening. We might have a look at it and think, no, it's not a very good paper, it's not suitable, it's not in the scope, or even it's not, it's too geographical based. If it gets past that, we then send it out to between 3 and 6 reviewers. And in some cases, I don't know what Alan and Janine's record is, but I've had papers that I've sent out to 20, 25 referees in order to find sort of 2 or 3 that are willing to do it. Goes to the referees, they send their assessments back to the editor sends them to the author makes revisions, it comes back to the editor. If the editor's not sure, they might send it back to the reviewers, and that path there, the reviewers, editors, authors, that could happen a couple of times. Very often it might go back to the reviewers once, or the editor can assess the reviews. After that, the editor then decides, no, it's rejected, there's various things wrong with it. The reviewers have been so critical, it gets rejected. The next, or alternatively, it's been back through this path with the reviewers and the author, and now gets accepted, no more revisions needed, and then goes to publishing there and that. So screening is on the scope. Does it fit the journal? If you don't read the author instructions, then that might cause it to fail. If there's not enough improvement, it gets rejected. And then hopefully it won't go through. So the editor, they do. I think I've discussed all this. The paper gets screened. The journal gives it a quick check. It gets scored for plagiarism, and a whole load of statistics come up, and even language. Goes to the editor. We look through it there. And then goes back sometimes. I mean, the editor giving a quick check. I mean, I've done this if I've been going through the papers. Sometimes a paper has come in while I've been working on editing, and I can turn it around within an hour or so. Sometimes if I've been away for a week or so, or 2 weeks, it might just sit there. We can discuss the paper with other editors, and then if the editor thinks it's okay, it then goes out for a full review and that there. So we can then the editor-in-chief might then just say that the paper can't go out for reviews, or is not going out for reviews, and these are various reasons for that. No, too many. It's not very good. It's inadequate. They've missed things out. It's poor or careless cover letter. No, it's not really a paper. It's a contract report. And depending on the journal, as it says at the top there, 30 to 60% of papers could be rejected or transferred at this stage there. So just be careful. I think ECSS has an acceptance of about 55% or so. So there's still 40% that get rejected at various stages there. You'll then, once it's been reviewed, you'll get the reviewer's comments. You then have to revise your manuscript according to those reviewers' comments. And the best way to do this is to produce a table. In the left-hand column is all the reviewers' comments. In the right-hand column is the way you've responded to them. So they're giving the table of these referee comments. Respond to all points, especially if you disagree. You don't have to agree with everything the referee says. Disagreement's okay, but you need to say why you disagree with it. There. Being polite and scientifically solid. Even if a referee is not polite, they occasionally say things like, oh, bits of this paper are rubbish. Why are you thinking about publishing it? Well, that's not very polite, but you be polite. Thanks for your helpful comments. We'll do better next time. State specifically what changes you made. I say some journals asked for a track changes version. Sometimes the referee wants you to do more work. It might be what would be called a major revision. They've not rejected the paper, but they want you to do a lot more things to it, sort of thing there. Sometimes we may reject a paper if it needs too much doing. It's still basically good paper, but it needs too much doing, and you wouldn't be able to do that within a short time. So we would reject it and say, but if you write a new paper with these new things added to it, then we can go in, we can accept, or we can consider the new paper there and that. The editor decisions, remember that refereeing or checking papers is a bit like reviewing grant applications. We get so many papers in that we're looking for reasons to reject papers, not accept them. What is it about this paper that means that I don't go any further, or it doesn't go any further? There. So looking for, as the referees said, there's a problem with it. Is there any reasons that we doubt the work and so on? I say very often a reject means that there's something about the paper. It can't be rescued in a short time, but it could be rescued in more work or so. There. If the science is okay, acceptable, good, then the decision needs to be major revision, not reject. There are a few things wrong with it, but it's still basically okay. In that case, have a major revision sort of thing there. So, as it says at the top there, it's not a democracy. as it'll often say in newspapers, the editor's decision is final. And to say we've all been here. I can't emphasize enough how we've all been through this, there and that. There, everyone has papers rejected. Don't take it personally. Your aim then is to say, why was it rejected? Can I improve it? Can I take all the advice? Should I just change it to another journal and so on, and do that? Don't have a paper that's been rejected by one journal. Don't just submit it to another journal without making changes. Because if someone's refereed your paper and given a whole set of comments to it, and you don't take those comments on board, you just submit it to another journal, there's a good chance it will go back to the same referees. And if a referee gets it back again and sees that you've not done anything to their comments, that makes them really annoyed. And they would write to the editor saying that it's not been changed. They've already done it. They've already reviewed it. The author couldn't be bothered changing it. Reject it. And then you'll get a reputation for doing this sort of thing there and that. So say the acceptance rejections, I mean, you can read all this, but a lot of papers, they don't get rejected for bad science. They're rejected, that is, as I mentioned earlier, we can't take lots of papers, therefore we'll direct them to another journal and that. It may be that the journal is not the right one for you. Sometimes the higher journals, things like Nature and Science, most papers submitted do not go for refereeing. They only referee a few of them there. They're so selective. And you then have to think about, well, do I need the paper in Science or Nature? If I put it in another journal, it will still get found as easily, sort of thing. That bullet point there, if the work and ideas are good, then the work will get accepted somewhere. I always say to my students and my colleagues, the people I'm working with, that publishing papers is a bit like running a marathon. It doesn't matter how long it takes, you still get the medal at the end of it. It doesn't matter whether you run it in 2.5 hours or run it in 5 days wearing a diving suit, you still get the medal at the end of it, sort of thing. So even papers that take a while in lower journals, they'll get noticed and you can promote them and so on. And the bit at the bottom there, data from rejected papers can be the foundation for a better paper. So it may be submitted too early. The one thing we often look out for, if someone says this is an initial study, and it says what else should be done, then the editor might tell you to, okay, we'll go away, wait until you've got more data, and then we'll do it there, sort of thing. So I think these are the final messages there. Everyone has to start somewhere. Be prepared for setbacks. Don't be too aggressive. I get letters from PhD students saying, I'm about to submit my thesis. I need this paper out before I submit my thesis. What's happening to it? If the paper's been with them for a long time, I have some sympathy, but sometimes the student will submit the paper 1 week. The week after will write saying, what's happening to my paper? Where is it? I need it out. For which I respond, well, if you need it out that quickly, you really should have submitted it earlier or put your submission date back there. In the institute I used to run, we used to have this saying, the 4th bullet point there, we used to have this up on the wall in the coffee room. The only surefire way of not failing is not trying. That is, if you're worried about failing in doing any of this, then if I were, I'd change your job, go and do something else. We all have to be prepared to fail. Hopefully it makes us better there. And then the referees, editors are there to exist, and rivalries do exist. We've all had papers refereed by someone who probably has a grudge against us. So that's just going through that. If I stop sharing there, that was I was going to say a quick whiz through. It's still been a couple of hours there. I don't know if Alan and Janine have got any comments now, and then if any of you have got any questions, now let us know.
Yeah, just from my side, thank you very much, Mike, and also Alan. I think there's a lot of learning and good advice and depths of information there that we look forward to applying. I was really excited to hear a lot of things. Lovely presentation. Thank you.
That's
we
good.
all get frustrated, but I think by working together and learning from one another, this is a learning by doing process,
Yeah.
My supervisor, he would get a review back. So I didn't learn from him. I had to learn myself. And he would throw it on his desk in a big huff and say, he's not doing that. And that was it. He never sent the article back. So we tried to supervise and as you say, persevere, and you'll get the medal at the end of the day.
Yeah, as Alan mentioned, nowadays it's increasingly common to work in teams. Elsevier has a graph that I really should get a new version, showing the average number of authors per paper. And in the 1960s, it was something like 1.2 as the average. No, most authors were most papers were single authors. And then there was a few, probably 2 or maybe 3. Now we get the Nature papers with 100 authors in 150 authors or whatever it is. And I say there's some that get into the thousands, which is ridiculous. But you are part of teams, and you are there to learn from everyone else as well.
So thanks, Mike. Alan, did you want to?
Yeah. Am I there?
Yes. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I think your presentation, Mike, is extremely valuable to young and older graduates who are getting into the publishing game. And the one point which I think you've emphasized, but I also want to emphasize it, is don't take the criticism of the referees personally. And often when you look at the comments that you receive, initially you might be a little bit bowled over, but when you go back and you reread and look at the comments in a different light and see it as the referee actually trying to help you make the manuscript better, then it all becomes a lot easier. And my experience is I can't ever remember receiving a response back from a submitted manuscript which is published without any change, and in other words, accept it as is. And I think students submitting and that need to realize that sort of a route is probably exceptionally rare, and the norm is you're going to have to make corrections and changes and additions and whatnot, and don't take it personally, and enjoy the ride.
Exactly. Yes. You're right. I mean, I must see probably 400 papers a year, and I think I've only ever seen 1, maybe 2, that has been published as is, no changes needed, in exactly the same way that I mean, I've had something like 36 successful PhD students, and I've had 1 or 2 unsuccessful ones as well, I should add. And of those, I think I've only had 1 that had such minor corrections to the thesis that they could do them in the evening, sort of thing there. So I've just noticed Nikki James has been on the call. It's great. Well, I can see your picture, Nikki. Not moving, but you've now got a good publishing record, so you might have comments on this as well.
I learned from Alan, was my mentor.
Yeah.
But the one thing that where to start a paper, I often tell my students I start by reading absolutely everything I can on the topic, and then it guides me in how to start the introduction and the discussion.
Yeah, you see, I mentioned about this scientific method of, creating hypotheses, just as you said, Nikki. You read lots of things, you build up an idea in your mind, and you say, oh, yeah, that's interesting. We'll go and test that and that. And I think sometimes when I'm not so much with a paper, but very often with a thesis, the student hasn't been as clear with their hypotheses. And I think what happens is most of us, we have the hypothesis in our mind. We have what we're vaguely looking for, but we don't write it down rigorously. And I think if you don't write it down rigorously, then there's always a chance of you not following it through, sort of thing. So as you said, but you get that hypothesis by you read lots of things, it all goes in, and then eventually you say, well, if I put that bit of information and that bit of information together, and probably this one as well, then I come up with this new idea, and this is what all of us have been doing as well. So that's good. Yeah, as you say, with Alan as your supervisor, yeah, I fully understand what you've gone through.
Yeah, and also with lots and lots of reading, then it often gives you another idea about how to analyze your data that you hadn't thought of.
Exactly. Again, you see, this is what I said about refereeing. The fact that many of us would say that the only time we now read, the only time I read a whole paper is usually when I'm refereeing it. When I'm writing papers and looking for that other literature, I'm usually going through the literature for a particular reason. Do I need the numbers? Do I need the conclusions or whatever there? But refereeing is one of the few times that you read the whole thing. Say very often, otherwise you skim read it, I think. So that's good.
And would anybody else like to make a final comment or input? We had a few meeting chats, but yeah, maybe what we're going to do next then, Mike, is circulate your talk. I had it in a PDF form, so we'll do that.
That's right.
And,
that's good.
Somebody also asked for the recording to be circulated, so we would do that as well.
Okay.
I really think
that's great.
Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you very much.
I'll send you the PDF so you can
yeah. And then thank you for everybody for participating. It's not just from Nelson Mandela University and our Institute for Coastal and Marine Research, but we've got other universities. I see CSIR here, we've got SAIAB here, we've got Wild Trust. So it's been a range of people participating today. So thank you very much to everybody. I think we had 56 people. It's gone down a little bit now because I think we were scheduled to finish at 12:30. All right, everybody. Thank you, Mike. Look forward to hearing from you
Pleasure.
again. If only it's in emails. We really appreciate your time, and Alan as well.
That's great. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Janine, and thanks to everybody.
Yeah, and I jumped in late. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank you, Janine, for inviting Mike, and Mike for taking your valuable time to do this. I'll be one of those that will look at the recording later because I was attending another meeting. And also just reiterate what you've said in terms of the role of review and being a reviewer. You learn a lot. And the students that are on this call, the CMR students, just a reminder that we'll be following up with events as well in terms of writing workshops and helping with that. And I'm hoping to see everybody when we have those. So
thank you
very much.
That was our final message from our new Director for Institute and Coastal Research. Thanks,
That's
Denise.
great.
Okay,
That's great.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye then.